Bobby Udoh joins us now, nation-building evangelist. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you very much.
Well, now we're talking about this economic matter now, not this, but to think about all of this, they are connected. Even when the finance minister was making that comment at Babcock University when she talked about allocation that states have and how they utilize all of those, which generated a lot of response. But the truth of the matter is, look, if state economies are not developed, they even cited the fact that poverty is linked to this insurgency. Mm-hmm. So all of those furore, how does that strike you?
Well, I think the first thing to say that she said nothing new. In her first tenure as finance minister during the Obasanjo administration, she was noted to regularly publish the revenues of states and local governments. In this dispensation, she's not done much of that, but we now and then hear how much states are earning. Any Nigerian who is particular about development should know by now that it's not only the federal government that gets revenue, states and local government get revenues. The question remains, why is there a focus among citizens on what the federal government earns and what it does with that revenue, and not what the state and local governments earn? I think that's the critical question, and that's what I think the Honorable Minister is seeking to achieve with her speech.
So in terms of the response that greeted that speech from hers, did you think that it was also out of place?
Well, not really. The two school of thought playing out here, or two groups playing out here, the first group are those who are really looking at the government, the federal government in this case, and suggesting that they need to do more. And she's going out to try and tell those groups to refocus as well at the other tiers of government. The second group are people who are trying to look at this as a way of government to deflect attention that is put on them. So it's not about how much the state governments earn, but it's just a political statement to deflect attention at them. But the summary at the end of the day is that what she said has put a critical question upon us, the citizens.
Well, at that time, in that statement, she did also give us a historical perspective of the performance of our economy over the years, how in the 80s and the 90s, we almost had this 20-year period where the investment was not just there. And so if that was the case, we will always feel it. We will always have to face up to it at some point in time, which we're doing now. But after 1999, then all those investments came in, and so we're gradually now picking up. But even at that, from 1999 till now, the resources that has gone to those states, would you say that we have judiciously, or to a large extent, done what we can or what we could?
The answer is simply no. I think that with the revenue that has come in, particularly in the last maybe 4 years, as you recognize from 2010, the federal, state, and local governments have earned significant amount of money. In addition, the Obasanjo administration and the Yar'Adua administration were not noted for sharing the excess crude oil account. President Jonathan has been quite open about that, and now that account has been depleted. There's the argument that the money doesn't belong to the federal government and such should be shared with the states. He's done that. So there's a lot of money out there. Compared to development, not a lot. But the question is beyond our states judiciously using their money. It's rather our citizens holding state and local government to account. That's the critical question.
You know, I heard the people say that it is the way it's skewed, straight from the Constitution, it makes it a little difficult for that focus to be there. First of all, the fact that all the monies, go to the federal government, and they look to the federal government to implement this sharing formula in which it has the lion's share. And then if you look at the amount of responsibility the federal government needs to take on, as stated in the exclusive list, all of that makes attention shift to the federal government as such. There have been times when states have said, hands off this, hands off that, because we found out that it was seen that it's not because you do not have the wherewithal, but in terms of capacity, you don't seem to have the capacity as the federal government to do certain things. Do you think it's more of a constitutional burden than, say, states not really doing what they ought to do?
I don't think so. That is not to ignore that argument, because there are several states, for example, who've spent significant amount of money on developing road networks and are yet to be fully refunded by the federal government. So that's just one area. There are many areas state could claim to have used their resources to do the work of the federal government and yet have not been refunded, and such resources could help for other development. But I think the other aspect is that the states do have money, and they can do a lot with the money. What they're doing with the money is a question. And the searchlight has to go more on the states and the local government, not ignoring the federal government. So whatever the arguments are, we have to raise a citizenry, a critical mass of citizens who are saying, okay, federal government, tell us what you're spending, as Ngozi Iweala is trying to do, but the state government also tell us what you're spending. And at the end of every year, let us not only wait for the National Assembly to call committees and say, how did you spend this money, and how are you going to spend next year?
How probable is that, considering the sharing formula?
The sharing formula is something that we can address another day. But for now, states do get money. It's not 0%. At least I think it's about 27%. But they are getting money. And what the Honorable...
That is all the 36 states.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. The truth is they could get more. And some of us do share that view that government should be decentralized. But at the moment, and referring to the speech in question, the states are receiving money. Some states got as much as 260 billion, which is my beautiful state, Akwa Ibom. Some other states got 200. That's still a lot of money.
So I think now the contention is not if they get money, but they do get money. Going further,
yep.
Why is it that at the end of it all, we get to see that some states do better than some others? Because it would seem as if some others deliberately, starved of funds. But
yep.
with this from Okonjo-Iweala, every state of the Federation gets some form of revenue. Yep. So in trying to fix the security situation in so many of these states, can't we then say some of these have been adequately channeled in that direction?
Yeah, there is a key argument there. I mean, what we see in several northern states, especially in the northeast where we have violence, the statistics have been interesting that Borno State has been listed as one of the top 10 states. And here is a state that complains about poverty. So there is money coming in for development that can help to alleviate poverty. But sometimes we also have to balance out by understanding that security is not exactly under the control of the state. And certain times when certain militancy or activities, political activities that brings in thuggery and all that rises up, you do need cooperation between state and federal government to deal with that. But I think that what this has done is to enable citizens of Borno, those who are in Nigeria and those who are abroad, to begin to ask those delicate questions, not only to the state government, the state assembly, to the representative in the Senate and the House of Reps. What are we doing with the money we're receiving? And the Borno State governor has said recently that they spent billions of naira taking care of the JTF force there. But we need to ask, what are we doing with the remaining money?
In part of what she released was that in 2013, and then she listed the top 10 allocations and how it went. Akwa Ibom gets 260 billion.
Yep.
That's the first. Then Rivers gets 230 billion. So they're next in rank. Delta, 209 billion. Bayelsa, 173 billion. This is in Naira, actually.
Yep.
Lagos, 168 billion Naira. Kano, 140 billion Naira. Katsina, 103 billion Naira. Oyo, 100 billion Naira. Kaduna, 97 billion Naira. Borno now comes in with 94 billion Naira. These are all funds that have gone to the states. And this does not add up or doesn't even bring or add the internally generated revenue.
Exactly.
So if they add their IGR to the monies they already receive, that's the thing. It will be huge.
Yeah. I mean, some states we don't have high internally generated revenue. Lagos, Port Harcourt, Udoh, Lagos Rivers, Udoh. Some of those states are doing quite well. Some states are not doing well. The states in the northeast, especially with the current climate insecurity, we don't have enough businesses and transactions going on locally. So the IGR could be low at the moment. But I'd like to really reiterate this point. There are two things that are important here. The first is that the states are getting money. Whether they're getting a right percentage, whether they're spending some of that money on doing federal projects and not being refunded for, they are getting money. What we need to see is we've got to become a country where we're not just hearing from the federal minister how much a state is receiving, that we're also hearing from the states on how that money has been spent. And so we have to have a citizen and a critical mass of citizens who are asking those questions. Second aspect is the government, the federal government has been good to come out and say this is what the state is getting. But the federal government also needs to take the initiative to say, we received this amount as well, and this is how we spent the amount. And so when the federal government seeks that citizens hold their state and local government to account, they need to take some initiative to achieve that. They need to call civil societies, they need to call several groups and address them and break down the figures. This is what we earned in 2013. Not only what we spent, what we borrowed and why we borrowed. There's got to be that level of transparency. So we're saying in summary, there's need for citizen initiative to hold government to account on expenditures, but there's also need for the federal government, state and local government to take initiative to encourage that level of accountability.
Do you think part of what overshadows all of this suggestion, because some people think that the center is too attractive, make the center a lot less attractive, including the money is going there because people are fighting to get in there and control resources. And that's why we have all of this. Now, if we were truly a federating state, I mean, if the federations were as strong as they ought to be in our laws, we may not necessarily have all this fight for the center and control the resources.
Well, let's take this scenario. If we say the federal government's revenue is cut down to, for purpose of illustration, 20%, and the state now gets 60 and 20 for the local government. I think that the 2015 election, for example, the fight would not be for the central, the fight would be for the states, because that's where the money is.
And that's where development should be strongest.
Exactly. So it is not where the money goes. It is what happens where the money is. So, yes, there could be a time we will have to sit down again and review the percentages that is received. But I'm of the opinion that if the federal government gets a lot of money, then the only way the federal government can be encouraged to perform better than it's doing at the moment is that there has to be a group of people that are constantly on their case. There has to be a group of people who are downloading the breakdown and are saying, okay, this is what we have. Can you tell us exactly what 1 trillion naira did for security? Can you break it down? How many tanks? How many helicopters? How many aircrafts? Can you break it down? In this era of social media, we can check prices of everything. We can confirm your spend.
And I think I think you're hitting it now on the head. This is the time for us to start to ask questions.
Exactly.
Because when we get to hear that some don't control security because they're not the big boss man in charge of security, but we're getting to see that some of these monies can actually be used properly to protect your citizens, so to speak. So now is the time for us to ask the question what states have been doing with such. Exactly. And with this release, you say even the federal government should also tell us the lump that they have gotten so far and how it has been disbursed. So we're calling everyone to account for what they have received so far.
Yep. I think even more than that, when we say we're calling everyone to account, it seems like a generic statement, but it doesn't take, no one is taking ownership of that. I think that what is important for viewers who are watching this is to recognize that this is a democracy. For many of us who are in our 30s and 40s, we kind of spent our teenage years in a military regime. You don't ask questions. I mean, you had no idea what was allocated. You had no idea what budget was. Nobody asked questions. You just take what you see. But we're in a democracy. Unfortunately, our first civilian president, as we returned to democracy, was an ex-military general. And his manner of governance, whatever his best intentions were, his manner was a bit like a military man. So from the Yar'Adua administration, we're beginning to see a bit of a democracy taking place. But as a people, the military culture is still inherent. So we need to look back at that culture and say, this is democracy. It offers an opportunity to say, I gave you the mandate to be in government. And that mandate means that you must come back and render account to me. So there has to be that culture shift. And when the people in government witness the culture shift by the people, they will begin to recognize, if we say we are allocating 10 billion to this, the people are going to find out how we spend that money. They're going to verify how that expenditure took place. So the call of the hour is not just is to our citizens to make a personal commitment, at the very least, know who your your local government councillor is, who your ward councillor, your local government chairman is, who is your representative in the State House of Assembly, who is your representative in the House of Reps, who is your representative in the Senate. And you have to be able to check on these people and write them letters. And in these days of email, it just takes a few minutes to send them email. I am from your area. I am checking on you. I'm checking on the committee you're participating in. And when is the opportunities to have their monthly or weekly surgeries, their meetings, you make time to attend. When these officials begin to see an engagement between the citizens and their representatives, they would begin to recognize the days of doing things as they wish. It's over.
I'm looking at a statement, rather her speech at the Babcock University. There's the coordinator minister for the economy, and I'm trying to look at how objective she tried to put this speech, because I'm getting to see some states. So you wouldn't say these are PDP states. She had to acknowledge Lagos State, for instance, that Lagos State has greatly improved, especially in its environment and sanitation in recent years. And she says now Lagos is a pleasant place to visit. And she also talked about Cross River, so many other states, and even Bauchi State has impressed her by absorbing millions of displaced people from those fleeing insurgency in the northeast. Yeah. If we have to look at some of those states, I realize that some of the states in the northeast haven't actually been mentioned here, if I'm not mistaken, because I've actually gone through this. Yeah. So can we start asking, for instance, state of emergencies is in 3 of the states. Yeah. What can they still function with what they have received so far, since there's no disruption in governance in these states? If these monies still come to them monthly, can we still ask them what they've done with it?
Yes, we can. Whatever the money is used for, the citizens of those states, and this is where we call them to action. As a people, we're all Nigerians. We're first Nigerians before we're from states or from ethnic groups. We need to join them in that voice, but we need people from Borno, people from Yobe, people from Adamawa to take the initiative of asking the government, in this time of emergency, what are you doing to prepare us for that time that we're hoping that Boko Haram would come? Then there has to be programs put in place. There has to be programs designed and some level of implementation. So when we say, okay, Boko Haram is ready to ceasefire, or the military has been able to curtail them, these programs are already taking shape so that we don't come back to that place where we found ourselves. It's no hidden secret that educationally the Northeast is behind many parts of Nigeria. It's no secret that industries are lacking. It's no secret that opportunity for young men and women to do well, it's lacking.
You know, when we talk towards debt, who do we hold responsible? Because if I have those facts before me that monies are given to all states in the country, and maybe I'm from state A, and you say we're educational backward, who should I be asking why my state is still backward when I know that monies come to my state?
The state executive of the state, we call them the executive governor. Nice title to have, but they're really servant of the people, because the mandate that they carry is the mandate of the people. That is the first shift. People cannot hold their government to account until there's a mindset shift. And that mindset shift is, you're not there because you're the king. You're there because I gave you my mandate to lead us. When that mindset is achieved by citizens, for in this case, in Yobe, in Borno, in Adamawa, what you then would have is citizens showing up at the state assembly when a budget is read to say, okay, we've noted how much you're spending on education. We've also noted on what you said the money will be spent on. At the end of the year, those citizens will call a gathering. The ones abroad, the ones in here, with social media, with website, with all the information you need. There are other citizens from other states who are ready to provide all the information and say, this is what we think you've spent the money on from our research. Can you come tell us what you have spent?
So more like the theory of the social contract here.
Exactly. And that's where the minister ended, the finance minister ended her speech.
What role do you think that tax has to play in this? Because, back to how our revenue is sourced, majority, yes, our GDP has been rebased, and we've seen that, there is a lot more that we're doing that is not exactly captured. But in terms of revenue that accrues to the federal government, you're still talking about a chunk of money that still comes from natural resources, which is still under the purview of the federal government in many instances. What role do you think that tax plays in all of this in terms of enhancing that social contract?
Oh, it's a massive, massive role. Again, it boils down to culture. We're yet to become a people that recognize we have to pay a tax. You want government to perform. Your part of the contract is to pay, and to pay the right amount for what you have earned. It's still a problem. The people who pay their taxes probably are those who are in civil service and in sectors where they don't have a choice. The money is deducted. The people need to recognize that for us to be able to hold our government to account, we need to play a part in paying taxes and paying the appropriate amount. But also we have to remember that every tax revenue, whether it's VAT or any other revenue that goes into the federal government coffers, is not owned by the federal government alone. It's shared between the federal, state, and local government.
Now let's link that with accountability. You've talked about how all the tiers of government need to be accountable. And it would seem that so far so good. All the focus has been on the federal government, and it would seem that there's not enough questioning happening at the state level. I would think that's the basis, for this. But the question will also be, even though citizens have held the federal government accountable, can we really say that the federal government has been transparent in its dealings with the citizenry?
Let me take a step back. One of the biggest challenges we have is that for a country of 160, 170, 180, God knows what the numbers is, because as we speak, babies are arriving in Nigeria. A very significant, a very tiny minority of people are trying to hold the federal government to account. But when we talk about a democracy, we're talking about a critical mass of people from different backgrounds and different areas holding government to account. It's not just a small number. It has to be a critical mass. A critical mass doesn't necessarily mean the majority, but it's an influential number that encourages, that puts a pressure. That's what it is. It puts pressure for government to be accountable. That is important. We need to get to that point where many more citizens are not sitting down at home and saying, as long as Dr. Obi Ezekwesili is out there asking the question, I'm all right to keep quiet or just say a few things on Facebook or Twitter. I've got to do more. We have got to see the hour calls for many more citizens to get out there. And we're not saying get on the streets and protest. Many of these things can be done just sitting in the comfort of your home.
And writing a letter and doing it. But why we wait for that critical mass to, come out and, hold their elected officials accountable? We're asking that at this point, the people that have been held to account, how transparent would you say they've been in terms of resources that come to their, say, ministries and parastatals, and how much and how they're actually spending those monies?
Yeah, that's where I was heading. That when you don't have a lot of people asking the question, you have a government that thinks nobody's asking. No, but a few people are asking. No, it's not loud enough. The voice of the people on the mandate is not loud enough. And when the voice is not loud enough, it's so easy to ignore it.
Would you really say that at this point? Because one would say that this speech, or, some parts of this speech, is as a result of pressure from certain areas, and they believe that this pressure should be spread evenly. Can we really say that because the voices are not loud enough, then, the sort of results you will get will be different from what you're currently getting?
I still stand by that statement. There are a few people who are very strong in that voice, but by the voice I mean is when you have a critical mass, a certain number. In some ways, she's trying to get the coordinating Minister for Economy and Finance Minister is trying to get, by mentioning the social contract, more people to get involved in asking these questions. And I'm sure she's aware that when we all get more people asking the question at state and local governments, we will also ask at the federal. We will not be blind to that. So we must have a stronger voice, but we cannot at this point saying, okay, the government is doing great. They can do much better. But I like to think that if I'm in government and you're not pushing me hard enough, not that I will go that way, but for most human beings, when you don't have the rope tight around your neck, you're bound to ignore some of the accountability that is required.
Hoping the rope doesn't strangulate them.
Exactly. Let me give this instance. If, let's say 30% of House of Reps or National Assembly members, just 30% of National Assembly members had 1,000 people write to them, just 1,000 to 30%, saying, we are aware of this matter and we're interested in it. And each of those letters carry facts of research they've done. You would have those members go out and hold those ministers to account and call them. And it's not going to be a public show when he's saying this committee is sitting on this. Out of that 1,500 show up for the public sitting, and say, we have these questions. Can you put that through to the minister of that ministry? We need to know this. What tends to happen is, for the first time, those guys will begin to think, citizens are interested. We're not just going to find these things and sweep it under the carpet. And 1 year down the line, the same 1,000 people write back to say, what has happened with the report of what you found last time? Not just do a finding and sweep it under the carpet. Okay. You will get federal government perform better. You get state government perform better. You get local government perform. But even greater, you have citizens who have been sitting on the sideline who progress on from writing the letters to progress on to do the research and progress on to writing to their representatives and even to the ministers. And in that moment, they begin to discover, I too can offer myself for service.
All right, let's take a break. We'll return and take a look at some more recommendations which are sent in by you out there. So please join us again. Welcome back. Well, we've got comments coming through from Henry here. As a matter of fact, no, let me look for this other one. He did suggest initially, because we're talking about holding states accountable. And then he says, that's Berry actually, he says, if the FG feels the states are not using funds judiciously, what is the EFCC doing? Are they not supposed to be investigated? So this raises some more questions about, because there are agencies out there that are supposed to do all of these. They can't just wait on the citizenry alone to do this. So if we've set up those agencies, now questions are for them. They have a role to play.
Now you ask this question. You want EFCC to investigate a state and local government. Where do they start? It is the citizens that write the petition. It is the citizens that do the research and saying, 250, for example, 250 million naira was allocated for renovation of schools. As far as we're concerned, the schools have not received that money. Here is the breakdown of what we've done. Here are pictures to show where each of those schools are. This is what the budget said. This is the facts on the ground. You present that to EFCC. This is the Commissioner for Education. This is the state governor. The EFCC needs citizens to provide them not just with petition with sufficient evidence. So that would enable them, of course they would do their investigation. That would enable them do their investigation and possibly bring those who are responsible to account.
Well, Olayemi says, we used to hear FG is not releasing funds, but now it looks as though the government or state governments are more corrupt, because he says, look, more funds are made available to them, but yet they haven't seen commensurate development. Yeah,
Olayemi, it's nothing new. The funds have always been released. It's not as if funds are released now. What the increase has come as a result of the excess crude oil account being shared with the oil revenue and VAT and revenue from customs. It's nothing new.
You know, everyone really has to be on this, because what we do to ourselves, if we don't ask those questions that we ought to, because if few people get in there and mass the wealth that is meant for the public to themselves, these are the kind of challenges you have. At some point, who knows, it just might implode. Because now we have militia groups. And basically what they are all agitating for is tied to one thing, if I could say that, development.
Exactly. And development needs money. But it doesn't need money alone. Development needs human beings. And the level of our human development is quite low. We really need a lot of work to change this military mindset we carry. And the military mindset still keeps us as the people who don't demand a lot of questions. When the government says we're spending 300 or 500 billion for 2014, we've got to really ask, okay, which sector gets the highest and why? We've got to really ask these serious questions. Not only do we ask the question when the budget has been read, at the end of the year, we've got to make government account for what they've spent. And I'm quite confident any state governor that has a town hall meeting, and the town hall meeting is filled with 5,000 to 10,000 citizens who've sent in questions, and they are constantly hackling on government. You said you would do this. You said you would do that. At the town hall meeting, we want those answers. That government is bound to sit up.
Even citizens, because the state houses of assembly, they also feature here, because in many cases, if not in all cases, I stand corrected. What we hear from citizens there is they're more like rubber stamp. We haven't seen anyone stand up against any government in those states saying, listen, could you account for this? It doesn't matter if we're in the same party. We're interested in development for the people.
Yes.
Have we seen that happen, or we need to see more of that if it hasn't?
We haven't seen it. We haven't seen it. Some states have been fortunate. Lagos and some of the states around the West have been fortunate. Many other states, the State House of Assembly have no pressure on them. So if you don't have any pressure on them, you're a rubber stamp for the governor. But let's go back again and say that as we're asking for people to mount pressure on the National Assembly, we should also desire to ask questions at the state level and the local government level. It is also important to note that some of us may live outside of our states. For example, a state like Lagos is a host to people from various parts of Nigeria. It doesn't exclude us from asking those questions from the local government councillor. For me, I think one of the biggest problems we have is this local government, the third tier, the one closest to the people in the rural areas. In many areas, the governance is non-existent.
Are they getting the funds?
Yes and no. The not evidence. Speculation does suggest that deductions come from the state government. So state government would justify that by saying we had spent money in those areas and we're deducting that. Some state government would be like, we install them and we could do what we want. But in an ideal world, we can say they're getting funds. There are people who are saying local government should be autonomous. But autonomous in what sense? If the governor still has control over the election of people who are local government chairman and councillor, he still would have control there. But again, when you do have people asking questions, and I'd like to reiterate that when people begin to ask questions, they're participating in the political process.
Okay.
And that is where we will begin to see more people not just ask questions, but say, I too can participate in the process.
Speaking about that participation, what role do you see elections play, the way we elect our leaders? How do you think that can change so many of all what we're talking about today?
As many who are watching know, I blog at bobudo.com. And for many months now, I've been talking about elections, that elections is just an occasion. There is a process that prepares one for the election. I've asked this question, is it credible elections we're looking for or credible candidates? We cannot seek for credible elections without credible candidates. It is important. And if government is talking about holding whole state and local government to account, I think what the federal government should seek to do is to encourage more citizens to get involved in political governance. And by that I mean, we must begin to see more citizens participate in politics.
Yeah, but is credible candidates not going to be predicated on credible elections?
You need the credible candidates to get of course, credible elections is essential, but you can have a credible elections and the candidates are not credible enough.
Yeah, because I've heard people say, listen, if I put myself up there, I risk the success I've made from the private sector, for those of them who are coming from there. So what they want to see is, look, if it's not credible, and then I go there, and then they already selected someone who is going to be their person, and then I go there, I'm messed up, I can't play the same because we're not on the same page. And
so who will build the card?
They just pull back.
Who will build the card? At some point, citizens have to take the initiative. And I've always believed that when you begin to have more credible people participating in local party politics, we're not just talking, and we have to change this mindset that when you say, I'm going into politics, it means you're contesting for an office. Office is probably about 2% of the activities in political parties.
I'm trying to link this to developments we've been talking about, because this is about national security, and we're looking at funds and how some of these can help sort the security situation. Take, for instance, we all live in Lagos.
Yep.
You recall how Oshodi was before now.
Yep.
You dare not go through Oshodi when it's even 6 o'clock or 6:30, but today it's a beautiful place. And someone will say that has actually taken care of security situation in that part of Lagos State. So it is with so many of the bridges that they are beautifying under the bridges of almost all the bridges we have. So I'm trying to link this to nation building and development, because these funds are actually something that we must talk about. If my state has been developed rapidly as the funds come in, we're likely to see a reduction in some of these issues that has to do with insecurity in different states or local governments. And you say people should start asking the questions. Away from questions, how can even the government act upon such revenue or funds that come to them? Because we haven't actually looked at the IGR now.
Yep.
So let's be blind to that and face what we know that has been released from the federal government. How well can they activate these funds for us to see as a people? Because now you've been talking about the people asking questions, but how can they help the people with such funds?
I think it's always quite difficult to expect something from a government that you've already concluded is not competent enough. And for many of us Nigerians, there may be maybe 3 or 4 or 5 governors that we think are competent enough. Not to mention that because these governors, for many of the good ones, are not operating in parties with enough platform of Nigerians who really want development, it gets difficult. So for all that we desire, we want government to perform great. You want development. We've got to take a step back. We've got to put the foundations in place. We need more of us in political parties. We need proper internal democracies in parties. So when a credible person stands for election and gets into office, it is not only the people asking the question, it's the political party that is asking their representative the question. And we're not just saying political parties, now is our time to share contract, let's recoup what we've invested. But we're having political parties that are saying, we set this as a manifesto. How far are we going with it? Because we have to render account. So the quality of our political party enables government do better by providing credible candidates for elections and for office, by holding their candidates in office to account, but also by joining with the citizens to hold proper and transparent town hall meetings where the real questions are asked and the proper answers are provided, therefore achieving transparency.
Do you ask questions of your state governor?
I do. Ask questions of my state governor, of my representative in the Senate, of my representative in the House of Reps, and my local government councillor.
What kind of response do you get when you ask?
It's been interesting. The initial phase was no response whatsoever. You write a letter, it's not no response, you drop a letter. I must commend my House of Reps representative. He's done well to acknowledge the letter and engage in conversation. So in that light, we're making progress. No response from my Senate rep, no response from my representative in the State House of Assembly, but I keep writing.
As is a good example, do you want to share his name?
Everyone knows Dan Abia, representing Eket Senatorial District, a federal constituency in the House of Reps.
But I really must put this in before you leave, and it's a question saying that, well, what the minister didn't mention was that the states, as we speak, have recorded a 40% drop in FAC for almost a year. So it looks like the blame is also been shifted to the government at the center, that the monies have been drastically reduced.
It's a good point. But I would have preferred that state government, local government, and the citizenry have somewhere they can connect to say, we have projected this amount for the year, but this is how much we're receiving. As a result, this is what we intend to do with the revenue we have. So we're not just going ahead with the, for example, 500 billion naira budget, and yet we're having 300 billion, and in that 300 billion, the security vote still remains the same. We want government to say things like security vote will be cut down, and things like overseas travels and trainings will be cut down as a result of how much we're receiving. So our projection is this, and this is how we want to take it forward.
All right, Bobby Udoh, thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you very much.
Bobby Udoh is a nation-building evangelist. We'll be back after this to look at some comments coming from you as well, so join us again in a moment.